we've got a lecture here from Randy Ray, who's a prominent MMTer, that we're going to dabble into. The lecture will be in the show notes. But really taking a dive into what exactly was happening during and after COVID, right? During and after the lockdowns of, yes, we saw this incredible spending from every country on earth, or at least every Western country on earth. And then we saw the prices go up, and the prices have continued to remain high and continue to inch upward. And it's easy to say, well, because of this spending, because of this increase in the money supply, we are obviously having higher prices. But before we even jump into that, I think into the video. I think it's worth just putting some other basic factors on the table, right? Because if we have inflation is basically a loss in your purchasing power. And I want to be clear, if I want to avoid the definition that inflation is just an increase in the money supply, which is a definition that seems to get thrown around a lot. Because if the definition of inflation is an increase in the money supply, and then you turn around and say, well, inflation or increasing the money supply causes inflation, you are technically correct because the definition is equal to itself. That is a utterly non-useful definition. Yes, if you increase the money supply, you have inflated the money supply. We're more concerned about the purchasing power of your money. How much does it cost to buy things? And, it has the aggregate price of this or that increased or decreased. That's what we're talking about with inflation, or in the case of decrease, deflation. And there were a couple big things that happened on Earth all at the same time, and the COVID lockdowns were just one of them. During the COVID lockdowns, I got to thank Peter Zahan for this, as much as he's rubbed us the wrong way for other things, but pointing out that because most countries on Earth, and specifically Western countries, have this boomer bubble happening, baby boomer bubble, which is to say the baby boomers were the biggest generation in human history, and they didn't have as many kids as their parents did. I think it was either the end of 21 or the beginning of 22, at least in America, the number of baby boomers retiring officially became greater than the number of Gen Z entering the workforce. And year after year, we're looking at a situation where it's like 500,000 a year delta, like 500,000 more people retire than enter the workforce. So we are now entering a demographic situation of a labor crunch. That is inflationary, right? That is going to increase prices on everything. Another thing that happened in China is that China had this zero COVID policy forever and ever and ever, and kept things locked down for much longer. And China is also experiencing a boomer bubble, worse apparently than any other country on the planet, to the point where apparently Mexican labor is now cheaper than Chinese labor. Because remember, the whole neoliberal world trade order was based on, okay, we'll outsource everything to the cheapest place possible, which was usually China, and we'll make the things cheaply over there. Well, China's labor is no longer the cheapest labor available because they are literally running out of people. All right. Another big one to put on the table, and this is one that's typically pointed out, but for whatever reason doesn't get the credit that I think it deserves, is that the COVID lockdowns caused a massive supply chain shock for everything. So does it stand to reason that prices may go up because, okay, the boat isn't able to show up on time, or the container ship isn't able to show up either in the same speed it was before, or the insurance rates went up, or for whatever reason, the supply chain broke down and has had difficulty coming back to life. Then the third big one, which is the Ukraine war, is that started in February 2022, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Ukraine was like the breadbasket of that area of the world in terms of the food that it was creating, and obviously they're not generating what they were generating before, which has additionally messed up supply chains, and of course has messed up the supply for against the demand. So and there's even more of this that we're going to talk about. But I wanted to put these like big, gaping, obvious pieces on the table to just be like, okay, money supply is not the only variable here.
Yeah, so also with the Ukraine war, what I want to add is you talked about the food supply. Much more importantly was the oil price
Yes.
spiked up
Thank you.
substantially as a result. And that was something that happened in 2022. So I think the last time we talked to Steph from Free Domain Radio about this, about inflation, we discussed, because even I think this was 2021, if I'm not mistaken, inflation had picked up noticeably. We talked about lumber prices and commodity prices like that. Obviously, largely due to supply chain coming to a halt and all kinds of COVID policies that were really stupid. And we had also said back then, as a result of these large deficits, and you're sending stimulus checks to everyone, we're probably going to see elevated inflation for the foreseeable future. This was 2021. We're probably going to see inflation. I believe I said on that call, we're going to see higher single-digit inflation possibly for the coming months and or years. But then 2022, February 2022, the Ukraine conflict broke out. So that was an added factor that we didn't even know about at that time. And that was the year when inflation spiked all over the world, in particular noticeable in the Western countries that weren't used to high inflation for decades and decades, right? So in the US, I think the year 2022, ironically also, of course, the year when the Fed started raising interest rates, right? So people always say raising interest rates stops inflation. The year the Fed started aggressively raising rates was the year that we had the highest inflation at 7% in the US. And I think in countries like Germany that are starved natural or that don't have much natural resources, it was even higher, went up as high as 9%, largely because of the oil price shock from the Ukraine war. So that just added to the complications from the COVID supply chains and the large deficits not going to any productive labor, but just replacing existing income, which people ended up using to buy a lot of electronics and stuff like that.
Yeah. I went to Lowe's. I went to Best Buy. Right.
And our services also, online services, became more utilized. Stuff like Zoom, Zoom calls became the norm. This was all maybe to some extent like kind of a psyop to get people, to get the boomers finally dependent on all this technology. But so a lot of kind of amazing. Inflation didn't rise even more, I think, actually, in light of all these factors. In the US, obviously, it's a testament to the large and diverse nature of the US economy, always ready to ramp up production, supply the goods that are needed, even when we're going through some kind of inflationary period.
If everybody who's watching this now or recording could like, share, and subscribe it helps us out a lot.
Yeah.
I hate saying it, but it's just true.